anyone who had information regarding this that had to come from your office. Putting that aside, which leads me to my final question, did you do anything about it?
From the outset, we've undertaken to make certain that we minimize the possibility of leaks. And I think we were successful over the 2 years that we were in operation.
Well, I wish you'd been more successful, sir. I think it was disruptive to the American people. My time has expired. I yield back.
Mr. Quigley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director, thank you for being here. This too shall pass. Earlier today and throughout the day, you have stated the policy that a seated president cannot be indicted, correct?
Right.
And upon questioning this morning, you were asked, could a president be indicted after their service, correct?
Yes.
And your answer was that they could.
They could.
Director, please speak into the microphone.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
So
They could.
the follow-up question that should be concerning is, what if a president serves beyond the statute of limitations?
I don't know the answer to that one.
Would it not indicate that if the statute of limitations on federal crimes such as this are 5 years, that a president who serves his second term is therefore under the policy above the law?
I'm not certain I would agree with the conclusion. I'm not certain that I can see
But the
the
statute
possibility that you suggest.
but the statute doesn't toll, is that correct?
I don't know specifically.
It clearly doesn't. I just want, as the American public is watching this and perhaps learning about many of these for the first time, we need to consider that and that the other alternatives are perhaps all that we have. But I appreciate your response. Earlier in questioning, someone mentioned that it was a question involving whether anyone in the Trump political world publicized the emails, whether or not that was the case. I just want to refer to volume 1, page 60, where we learned that Trump Jr. publicly tweeted a link to the leak of stolen Podesta emails in October of 2016. You're familiar with that?
Yeah.
So that would at least be a republishing of this information, would it not?
I'm not certain I would agree. I'm not certain I would agree with that.
Director Pompeo assessed WikiLeaks at one point as a hostile intelligence service. Given your law enforcement experience and your knowledge of what WikiLeaks did here and what they do generally, would you assess that to be accurate or something similar? How would you assess what WikiLeaks does?
Absolutely. And they are currently under indictment. There's Julian Assange.
Would it be fair to describe them as, you would agree with this Director Pompeo, that's what he was when he made that remark, that it's a hostile intelligence service, correct? If we could put up slide 6. This just came out of WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks. Donald Trump, October 10th, 2016. This WikiLeaks stuff is unbelievable. It tells you the inner heart. You gotta read it. Donald Trump, October 12th, 2016.
Unbelievable.
This WikiLeaks is like a treasure trove. Donald Trump, October 31st, 2016. Boy, I love reading those WikiLeaks. Donald Trump, November 4th, 2016. What any of those quotes disturb you, Mr. Director?
I'm not certain I would say.
Wow.
Well, it's probably problematic is an understatement in terms of what it displays, in terms of giving some, I don't know, hope or some boost to what is and should be illegal activity.
Volume 1, page 59. Donald Trump Jr. had direct electronic communications with WikiLeaks during the campaign period. On October 3rd, 2016, WikiLeaks sent another direct message to Trump Jr. asking you guys to help disseminate a link alleging candidate Clinton had advocated a drone to attack Julian Assange. Trump Jr. responded that, quote, he had already done so. Same question. This behavior, at the very least, disturbing your reaction.
Disturbing and also subject to investigation.
Could it be described as aid and comfort to a hostile intelligence service, sir?
I wouldn't categorize it with any specificity.
I yield the balance to the chairman, please.
Get it going.
I'm sure I can make good use of 27 seconds, but Director, I think you made it clear that you think it unethical, to put it politely, to tout a foreign service like WikiLeaks publishing stolen political documents to the presidential campaign.
Certainly, call for investigation.
Thank you, Director. We're going to go now to Mr. Crawford, and then after Mr. Crawford's 5 minutes, we'll take a 5 or 10 minute break.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Mueller, for being here. Days after your appointment, Peter Strzok texted about his concern that there's, quote, no big there in the Trump campaign investigation. Did Strzok or anyone else who worked on the FBI's investigation tell you that around 10 months into the investigation, the FBI still had no case for collusion?
What are you doing?
Peter Strzok.
I'm sorry, can you move the microphone up closer?
Sure, there's a quote attributed to Peter Strzok. He texted about his concern that there's, quote, no big there in the Trump campaign investigation. Did he or anyone else who worked on the FBI's investigation tell you that around 10 months into the investigation, the FBI still had no case for collusion?
No.
Is the Inspector General report correct that the text messages from Peter Strzok and Lisa Page's phones from your office were not retained after they left the special counsel's office?
Well, I don't, it depends on what you're talking about. The investigation into those Peter Strzok went on for a period of time, and I'm not certain what it encompasses. It may well have encompassed what you're referring to.
Okay, let me move on just real quickly. Did you ask the department to authorize your office to investigate the origin of the Trump-Russia investigation?
I'm not going to get into that. It goes to internal deliberations.
So the circumstances surrounding the origin of the investigation have yet to be fully vetted then. I'm certainly glad that Attorney General Barr and U.S. Attorney Durham are looking into this matter. With that, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to the Ranking Member Nunes.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Mueller, I want to make sure you're aware of who Fusion GPS is. Fusion GPS is a political operations firm that was working directly for the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democrat National Committee. They produced the dossier, so they paid Steele, who then went out and got the dossier. And I know you don't want to answer any dossier questions, so I'm not going there, but your report mentions Natalia Lesnitskaya 65 times. She meets in the Trump Tower. It's this infamous Trump Tower meeting. It's in your report. You've heard many of the Democrats refer to it today. The meeting was shorter than 20 minutes, I believe. Is that correct?
I think what we have in our report reflects it was about that length.
So, do you know, so Fusion GPS, the main actor, Fusion GPS, the president of the company, or the owner of the company, is a guy named Glenn Simpson who's working for Hillary Clinton. Glenn Simpson, do you know how many times Glenn Simpson met with Natalia Lesnitskaya?
Myself? No.
Would it surprise you that the Clinton campaign dirty ops arm met with Natalia Lesnitskaya more times than the Trump campaign did?
Well, this is an area that I'm not going to get into, as I indicated at the outset.
I'm not going to know what's going on.
Did you ever interview Glenn Simpson?
Again, I'm going to pass on that.
According to, I'm going to change topics here. According to notes from the State Department official Kathleen Kavalak, Christopher Steele told her that former Russian intelligence head Trubnikov and Putin advisor Surkov were sources for the Steele dossier. Now, knowing that these are, not getting into whether these sources were real or not real, was there any concern that there could have been disinformation that was going from the Kremlin into the Clinton campaign and then being fed into the FBI?
As I said before, this is an area that I cannot speak to.
Is that because it's not in the report, or you're just, or because of an ongoing
Internal
investigation?
deliberations, other proceedings, and the like.
Okay. When Andrew Weissman and Zainab Ahmed joined your team, were you aware that Bruce Orr, Department of Justice top official, directly briefed the dossier allegations to them in the summer of 2016?
Again, I'm not going to speak to that issue.
Okay. Before you arrested George Papadopoulos in July of 2017, he was given $10,000 in cash in Israel. Do you know who gave him that cash?
Again, it's outside our ambit, and questions such as that should go to the FBI or the department.
But it involved your investigation.
It involved, as persons involved in my investigation.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller.
We will stand in recess for 5 or 10 minutes. Please, folks, remain in your seats. Allow the director, Mr. Zebley, to exit the chamber.
You heard the man. According to the chairman, there'll be a brief break here, allowing us to look back at what we just witnessed. I think it is safe to say a rather decidedly different tone and tenor of this afternoon session. Same room, different committee, different bearing certainly by the chairman. The takeaway, two of the quotes I'm looking at that I wrote down: it is not a witch hunt. It was not a hoax. The Democrats were able to establish those quotes from Mr. Mueller. Before Nicole and I go to our panel of experts here, let's look at the answers that Chairman Schiff was able to extract on a rapid-fire basis from Director Mueller at the top of this hearing.
When Donald Trump called your investigation a witch hunt, that was also false, was it not?
I'd like to think so, yes.
Well, your investigation is not a witch hunt, is it?
It is not a witch hunt.
When the president said the Russian interference was a hoax, that was false, wasn't it?
True.
When he said it publicly, it was false?
He did say publicly that it was false, yes.
And when he told it to Putin, that was false too, wasn't it?
That I'm not familiar with.
When the president said he had no business dealings with Russia, that was false, wasn't it?
I'm not going to go into the details of the report along those lines.
But when the president said he had no business dealings with Russia, in fact, he was seeking to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, was he not?
I think there is some question about when this was accomplished.
Well, you would consider a billion-dollar deal to build a tower in Moscow to be business dealings, wouldn't you, Dr. Mueller?
Yeah, absolutely.
So here we are back again. We have some new friends joining us. Mimi Rocha, former U.S. attorney in former assistant U.S. attorney, Southern District of New York, now with the Pace University School of Law. Neil Katyal, former acting Solicitor General for our federal government before the Supreme Court. You know Claire McCaskill, former Democratic Senator from the great state of Missouri. And of course, Nicole Wallace, someone I won't say who, called that the Red Bull version of Robert Mueller after the break.
He's like such a bad leaker. I had a theory that, listen, this is the last thing I said before this started. This committee is so different. Adam Schiff has been investigating the Russian attack on our democracy since it happened. So Adam Schiff is as steeped in the substance as Robert Mueller, and this was much more a conversation between two professionals who share the same concerns about the gravity of the Russian attack on the 2016 elections in this country. So this felt different because it was different. You also had in Devin Nunes, the other thing that we talked about as we went into this hearing was that the things that are said on Fox News are indiscernible now from Republican House members. That is not more accurate for any two sort of beings on both sides of that divide than Devin Nunes and Sean Hannity.
The world Nunes laid out with Mueller looking up at him is contrary to the world Mueller knows.
Well, because it's BS. I mean, it's a make-believe world. He was throwing out things that are unsubstantiated by any reporting anywhere. I think that what's really important, and I think what our viewers are really hungry for, is where did the substance move? And I think where the substance changed, what's different now than it was when this hearing started a couple hours ago. We now have Robert Mueller, in his own voice, confirming some of the most alarming and grave pieces of volume 1 of this report, that the Russians wanted Donald Trump, that Donald Trump and his campaign knew that the Russians wanted Donald Trump, that 150 contacts between the Trump campaign and the Russians are chronicled in here. Not as much of a sort of semantic game, not as much flipping to certain pages in that obstruction report. And I thought it worked for the special counsel and for the Senate or the House Intel Committee.
Senor Contiel, then Mimi Rocca, what did you make of this afternoon?
Yeah, I agree with Nicole to the extent that I think Republicans were cheering, and maybe the president himself, after the first set of hearings in the morning. I think they're not going to be now. I think Schiff was unbelievably effective in telling the story in really simple ways. Not even 150 witnesses or this or that, but I'd say 5 things. Number 1, he said Russia interfered in the election. Number 2, Russia did it to help Trump. Number 3, the Trump campaign welcomed the help from Russia. Number 4, the president's own son welcomed it, said he, quote, loved it. And then number 5, that Trump himself sought to make money from Russia with the Moscow Tower. Those 5 things together are a devastating portrait of, you wouldn't want even, a CEO, of Target or something to have that, but let alone the president of the United States have these accusations.
Maybe the only problem is in the television age, Mueller didn't say it the way Neil just said it. And I know that we're keeping account 155 times so far. Robert Mueller has declined to answer or deflected. And so professionals like you watch this with some frustration, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't fault Robert Mueller for being sort of nonpartisan, right? That is not my criticism.
Right.
And that's actually, that's him, and that gives him credibility and integrity.
Someone should be, yeah.
But I think what we're missing, and we were talking about a little bit, is the forcefulness. Where is his... He doesn't, frankly, have the command of, it doesn't seem to have the command of the facts that I thought he would. That was supposed to be sort of the best, one of the best things about Mueller. The reason I think Schiff was so good is that he gave the summation and Mueller kind of agreed with it, right? And whereas this morning you had people trying to draw it out of Mueller and he wasn't going to get it. Schiff did it for him, he agreed with it. I wish this hearing had gone first. It would have made so much more sense in the story. Here's what happened, and here's why the obstruction matters. Maybe they had a reason for doing it this way. Can't imagine what it is.
Senator.
Well, here I'm confused by the Republicans. They say, oh, this investigation was flawed, it was biased, it was awful, and and then they say, oh, the investigation cleared President Trump. Well, the same thing on foreign interference. They say on one hand that the Russians were in fact behind the Steele dossier to try to help Hillary Clinton. Well, that's not what the report says. They were never trying to help Hillary Clinton. That's one thing that's come out very clearly, that Mueller has not equivocated on at all. The Russians wanted Trump. End of discussion. So all of this obfuscation they're doing, they just can't make up their mind. It's like they're doing a short talking point, and none of it makes sense when you string it all together. I think I can answer this for you, having once been part of the party formerly known as Real Republicans. I think that what they are doing is pulling the thread through from Trump himself. One doesn't have to add, 1 + 1 doesn't have to equal 1, or it can equal -7. I mean, Donald Trump said to his supporters many, many months ago, as though preparing the country for today, don't believe your eyes, don't believe your ears, don't believe what you see, don't believe what you hear. Keep your eyes right here on me. They're not trying to make sense. They're just saying stuff. As a lawyer, their case is so confusing, it gives me a headache. A jury would just throw up their hands and say, I'm not sure what they're trying to prove here.
So, Senator, forgive me, what do you do about this as a political matter? Let's say you are Speaker Pelosi watching today. We have the House about to go on an extended summer recess after this. What happens? What gives?
Well, I think the one thing they have to do is they really need to put on afterburners these lawsuits compelling testimony. These are contempts. They have to go through the court system. We've got McGahn. Clearly, McGahn needs testimony. And so they've got to get going, and that's what they could do during the break. It would be very powerful to have the White House counsel in front of this committee right after Labor Day. And, typically it doesn't take that long, but the courts might, and you guys should weigh in here. Would the courts expedite a determination on contempt
because of the subject matter at hand and who's involved?
I think they would, but I think that the downside is that's still going to
Spitting
take
on
some
my
time. You're going to go from the trial court to the circuit court and then to the Supreme Court of the United States. We're talking about months. I don't think we would see him again testify in September that way. And of course, there is another solution, which is an impeachment proceeding, because that would pierce these prejudices and get the show on the road.
It would certainly make their case
And so
stronger, right?
oddly, the president's legal strategy of not giving them any documents, no subpoena, this and that, or the other, not permitting this to be penance enforced, all of that together actually strengthens the hand for impeachment, even if there are Democrats who don't want to do it politically. In order to get to the truth, they may need to do it.
Well, let me echo my friend Nicole Wallace and say, on principle, they should begin the impeachment inquiry. And Pelosi could always say, this will strengthen our legal hand to get the information we need so America has all the facts.
It's just an inquiry, and this will bring Don McGahn
This will
front
bring
and
us
center.
the evidence.
He won't be able to hide behind that. Frank Figliuzzi is waiting to talk with us, and because he ran counter intel at the FBI, Frank, before you do, I want to play this exchange on the topic of very germane of WikiLeaks.
This just came out, WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks. Donald Trump, October 10th, 2016. This WikiLeaks stuff is unbelievable. It tells you the inner heart. You gotta read it. Donald Trump, October 12th, 2016. This WikiLeaks
all this fucking
is like a treasure trove.
Get to
Donald
this.
Trump, October 31st,
Get to this shit.
2016. Boy, I love reading those WikiLeaks. Donald Trump, November 4th, 2016. What do those quotes disturb you, Mr. Director?
I'm not sure that I would say,
How do you react to it?
it's probably problematic as an understatement in terms of what it's displays, in terms of giving some, hope or some boost to what is and should be illegal activity.
Frank Figliuzzi, your take.
So look, let's cut to the chase here. What Bob Mueller was telling us was essentially this president, by aligning himself and encouraging the activity, the criminal conduct of WikiLeaks, was giving them a boost, encouraging them to do what they needed to do. And make no mistake, we have a president that not only has aligned himself with Putin and other adversaries, but has publicly aligned himself with WikiLeaks, that we treat, the U.S. government treats, our government says, as an adversarial service. They are the equivalent of a foreign intelligence service. And in this case, they were joined at the hip with Russia. They are a mercenary for hire. They will break in and steal and distribute whatever you need done if they feel like doing that. And Bob Mueller, again, may not be coming across as a strong opponent of anything right now, but he strongly said this president gave these bad guys a boost.
So, Nicole Wallace, to Frank's last point, Bob Mueller may not be coming across in a strong manner. How do you take the sum total of today? If you were the Democrats, how do you make it into the movie they were dreaming it would be?
Listen, I come from campaigns where you hang a lantern around your problems, and I think the problem becomes the strength. I think the fact that he doesn't sound aggressive means he's not partisan. The fact that he doesn't sound polished means he's trustworthy. And the fact that he doesn't sound like he's out to get anybody, which is what Chuck Rosenberg said, is the whole point. He wasn't. He was after the truth. So I think he is to be believed. He is to be trusted. He's a reluctant witness. I think he was a reluctant appointee as special counsel. He looks like someone who would rather have not have had this job, but that doesn't mean he didn't do it with immense integrity, and that doesn't mean that no Republican has questioned the facts or the conclusions of either volume of his report. No Republican has pointed to a single line and said this isn't true, which means that the Republicans today may not agree with how this was put together, but they have not disputed a single finding of the Mueller report.
Just to repeat some numbers that are germane and important, swearing Mueller in this afternoon was his 90th appearance before Congress. He is 15 days into, prior to turning 75 years old.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Swalwell, you are recognized.
Thank you. Director Mueller, as a prosecutor, you would agree that if a witness or suspect lies or obstructs or tampers with witnesses or destroys evidence, during an investigation, that generally that conduct can be used to show a consciousness of guilt. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Let's go through the different people associated with the Trump campaign and this investigation who lied to you and other investigators to cover up their disloyal and unpatriotic conduct. If we could put Exhibit 8 up. Director Mueller, I'm showing you campaign chairman Paul Manafort, political advisor Roger Stone, deputy campaign manager Rick Gates, national security advisor Michael Flynn, Donald Trump's personal attorney Michael Cohen, and foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos. These 6 individuals have each been charged, convicted, or lied to your office or other investigators. Is that right?
Yes, although I look askance at Mr. Stone, because he is he is in a different case here in D.C.
So National Security Advisor Flynn lied about discussions with Russian ambassador related to sanctions. Is that right?
That's correct.
Michael Cohen lied to this committee about Trump Tower Moscow. Is that correct?
Yes.
George Papadopoulos, the president's senior foreign policy advisor, lied to the FBI about his communications about Russia's possession of dirt on Hillary Clinton. Is that right?
Yes.
The president's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, lied about meetings that he had with someone with ties to Russian intelligence. Is that correct?
That's true.
And your investigation was hampered by Trump campaign officials' use of encryption communications. Is that right?
We believe that to be the case.
You also believe to be the case that your investigation was hampered by the deletion of electronic messages. Is that correct?
It would be, yes. Generally, any case would be if those kinds of communications are used.
For example, you noted that Deputy Campaign Manager Rick Gates, who shared internal campaign polling data with a person with ties to Russian intelligence at the direction of Manafort, that Mr. Gates deleted those communications on a daily basis. Is that right?
I take your word. I'm saying I don't know specifically, but within the report, then I support it.
That's right, Director. It's Volume 1, page 136.
Thank you.
In addition to that, other information was inaccessible because your office determined it was protected by attorney-client privilege. Is that correct?
That is true.
That would include that you do not know whether communications between Donald Trump and his personal attorneys, Jay Sekulow, Rudy Giuliani, and others discouraged witnesses from cooperating with the government. Is that right?
I'm not going to talk to that.
That would also mean that you can't talk to whether or not pardons were dangled through the president's attorneys because the shield of attorney-client privilege.
I'm not going to discuss that.
Did you want to interview Donald Trump Jr.?
And I'm not going to discuss that.
Did you subpoena Donald Trump Jr.?
And I'm not going to discuss that.
Did you want to interview the president?
Yes.
Director Mueller, on January 1st, 2017 through March 2019, Donald Trump met with Vladimir Putin in person 6 times, called him 10 times, and exchanged 4 letters with him. Between that time period, how many times did you meet with Donald Trump?
I'm not going to get into that.
He did not meet with you in person, is that correct?
He did not.
As a result of lies, deletion of text messages, obstruction, and witness tampering, is it fair to say that you were unable to fully assess the scope and scale of Russia's interference in the 2016 election and Trump's role in that interference?
I'm not certain I would adopt that characterization in total. There may be pieces of it that are accurate, but not in total.
But you did state in Volume 1, page 10, that while this report embodies factual and legal determinations, the office believes it to be accurate and complete to the greatest extent possible. Given these identified gaps, the office cannot rule out the possibility that the unavailable information would shed additional light. Is that correct?
That is correct. We don't know what we don't know.
Why is it so important that witnesses cooperate and tell the truth in an investigation like this?
Because the testimony of the witnesses goes to the heart of just about any criminal case you have.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back. And thank you, Director Mueller. Ms. Stefanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mueller, as special counsel, did you review documents related to the origin of the counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign?
On occasion.
Was the Steele dossier one of those documents that was reviewed?
And I can't discuss that case.
I'm just asking a process question. Have you read the Steele dossier?
And again, I'm not going to respond to that.
You were tasked as special counsel to investigate whether there was collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign associates to interfere with the 2016 election. And the FBI, we know, has relevant documents and information related to the opening of the CI investigation. Were you and your team permitted to access all of those documents?
And again, I can't get into that investigative, what we collected, what we're doing with investigation materials.
Let me ask it this way. Was there any limitation in your access to documents related to the counterintelligence?
That's such a broad question. I have real trouble answering.
Did the special counsel's office undertake any efforts to investigate and verify or disprove allegations contained in the Steele dossier?
Again, I can't respond.
The reason I'm asking for the American public that's watching, it's apparent that the Steele dossier formed part of the basis to justify the FBI's counterintelligence investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. As we know, it was used to obtain a FISA warrant on Carter Page. This is why I'm asking these questions. Did your office undertake any efforts to identify Steele's sources or subsources?
Again, the same answer.
Were these tasks referred to any other agencies?
Again, I can't speak to it.
Did your office consider whether the Russian government used Steele's sources to provide Steele with disinformation?
Again, I can't speak to that.
I understand I'm asking these questions just for the record, so thanks for your patience. Shifting gears here, did any member of the special counsel's office staff travel overseas as part of the investigation?
Yes, but I can't go further than that.
I'm going to ask, to which countries?
And I can't answer that.
Did they meet with foreign government officials?
Again, it's out of our bailiwick.
Did they meet with foreign private citizens?
Again, I have the same response.
Did they seek information about a U.S. citizen or any U.S. citizens?
A territory that I cannot go to.
He's terrible.
Thank you for answering on the record. These are important questions for the American public, and we're hopeful that the IG is able to answer these questions. I will yield the balance of my time to the ranking member.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Mueller, I want to go back to what we started off with. Joseph Mifsud, who's at the center of this investigation. He appears in your report a dozen times or more. He really is the epicenter. He's at the origin of this. He's the man who supposedly knows about Clinton's emails. You've seen on the screen, the Democrats have continually put up all the prosecutions that you made against Trump's campaign officials and others. But I'm struggling to understand why you didn't indict Joseph Mifsud, who seems to be the man in the middle of all of this.
Well, I think you understand that you cannot get into classified or law enforcement information without a rationale for doing it. And I have said all I'm going to be able to say with regard to Mr. Mifsud.
Were you aware of Kathleen Cadillacs' involvement, that she had met with Ms. Steele, the State Department official?
Again, I can't respond to that question. It's outside my jurisdiction.
All right. All for this.
The Carter Page FISA warrant was re-upped 3 times. The last time it was re-upped was under your watch. So were you in the approval process of that last time that the Carter Page warrant was?
Well, I can't speak specifically about that warrant, but if you ask, was I in the approval chain, the answer is no.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yield back.
Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Special Counsel Mueller, for your testimony and for your service to our country. Donald Trump over the years has surrounded himself with some very shady people that lied for him, people that covered up for him, people that helped him enrich himself. I want to talk specifically about one of those instances that's in your report. Specifically, let's turn to the Trump Tower Moscow project, which you described in your report as, quote, as a, quote, highly lucrative deal for the Trump organization. Is that right?
I would have to look at the quote from the report if you have it.
Sure, it's on volume 2, page 135. It's described as highly lucrative.
That's what I got. Unfortunately, it's a problem to mental.
Okay, I have it. Sure, I have it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, no problem. Your office prosecuted Michael Cohen, and Michael Cohen was Donald Trump's lawyer, for lying to this committee about several aspects of the Trump organization's pursuit of the Trump Tower Moscow deal. Is that right?
That's correct.
According to your report, Cohen lied to, quote, minimize links between the project and Trump, unquote, and to, quote, stick to the party line, unquote, in order not to contradict Trump's public message that no connection existed between Trump and Russia. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, when you're talking about the party line here, the party line in this case...
If I can interject one thing, I should have said at the outset, it was in the report, and consequently, I do believe it to be true.
Thank you. The party line in this case was that the deal ended in January 2016. In other words, they were saying that the deal ended in January 2016 before the Republican primaries. In truth, though, the deal extended to June 2016, when Donald Trump was already the presumptive Republican nominee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The party line was also that Cohen discussed the deal with Trump only 3 times, when in truth, they discussed it multiple times. Is that right?
Also true, and the basis for part of the basis for the plea that he entered for lying to this entity.
Thank you, and thank you for prosecuting that. The party line was also that Cohen and Trump never discussed traveling to Russia during the campaign, when in truth, they did discuss it. Is that right?
That's accurate.
Nope.
And the party line was that Cohen never received a response from the Kremlin to his inquiries about the Trump Tower Moscow deal. In fact, Cohen not only received a response from the Kremlin to his email, but also had a lengthy conversation with a Kremlin representative who had a detailed understanding of the project. Is that right?
If it's in the report, that is accurate. Recitation of that piece of the report.
So you have the candidate Trump at the time saying he had no business dealings with Russia, his lawyer who was lying about it, and then the Kremlin who during that time was talking to President Trump's lawyer about the deal. Is that right?
I can't adopt your characterization.
Not only was Cohen lying on Trump's behalf, but so was the Kremlin. On August 30th, 2017, 2 days after Cohen submitted his false statement to this committee, claiming that he never received a response to his email to the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin's press secretary told reporters that the Kremlin left the email unanswered. That statement by Putin's press secretary was false, wasn't it?
I can't speak to that.
Although it was widely reported in the press.
Again, I can't speak to that, particularly if it was
you
dependent
bitch.
upon media sources.
But it was consistent with the lie that Cohen had made to the committee. Is that right?
I'm not certain I could go that far.
So Cohen, President Trump, and the Kremlin were all telling the same lie.
I defer to you on that. I can't get into the details.
Special Counsel Mueller, I want to ask you something that's very important to the nation. Did your investigation evaluate whether President Trump could be vulnerable to blackmail by the Russians because the Kremlin knew that Trump and his associates lied about connections to Russia related to the Trump Tower deal?
I can't speak to that.
I yield back, Chairman.
So bad. So
Mr. Hurt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Mueller, you've been asked many times this afternoon about collusion, obstruction of justice, and impeachment in the Steele dossier, and I don't think your answers are going to change if I ask you about those questions. So I'm going to ask about a couple of press stories, because a lot of what the American people have received about this have been on press stories, and some of that has been wrong, and some of those press stories have been accurate. On April 13th, 2018, McClatchy reported that you had evidence Michael Cohen made a secret trip to Prague during the 2016 presidential election. I think he told one of the committees here in Congress that was incorrect. Is that story true?
I can't go into it.
Got you. On October 31st, 2016, Slate published a report suggesting that a server at Trump Tower was secretly communicating with Russia's Alfa Bank, and I quote, akin to what criminal syndicates do. And do you know if that story is true?
Do not.
You do not know whether it's true. So did you not investigate these allegations which are suggestive of potential Trump-Russia?
Because I believe not true, it would not be investigated. It may well have been investigated, although my belief at this point is not true.
Good copy, thank you. As a former CIA officer, I want to focus on something I think both sides of the political aisle can agree on. That is, how do we prevent Russian intelligence and other adversaries from doing this again? And after overseeing counterintelligence operations for 12 years as FBI director, and then investigating what the Russians have done in the 2016 election, you've seen tactics, techniques, and results of Russian intelligence operations. Our committee made a recommendation that the FBI should improve its victim notification process when a person, entity, or campaign has fallen victim to active measures of attack. Would you agree with this?
It sounds like a worthwhile endeavor. I will tell you, though, that the ability of our intelligence agencies to work together in this arena is perhaps more important than that. And adopting whatever, and I'm not that familiar with legislation, but whatever legislation will encourage us working together. By us, I mean the FBI, CIA, NSA, and the rest. It should be pursued aggressively early.
Who do you think should be responsible within the federal government to counter disinformation?
I'm no longer in the federal government, sorry.
But you've had a long career, storied career, and I don't think there's anybody who better understands the threat that we are facing than you. Do you have an opinion as a former FBI officer?
As to
the coordinator within the federal government on how to deal with it.
I don't want to wade in those waters.
A good copy. One of the most striking things in your report is that the Internet Research Agency not only undertook a social media campaign in the U.S., but they were able to organize political rallies after the election. Our committee issued a report and insight on saying that Russia's active measures are growing with frequency and intensity, and including their expanded use of groups such as the IRA, and these groups pose a significant threat to the United States and our allies in upcoming elections. Would you agree with that?
Yes. In fact, one of the other areas that we have to look at, and many more many more countries are developing capability to replicate what the Russians have done.
You alluded to making sure all the elements of the federal government should be working together. Do you have a suggestion on a strategy to do that to counter this disinformation?
Not overarching.
Is this, in your investigation, did you think that this was a single attempt by the Russians to get involved in our election, or did you find evidence to suggest they'll try to do this again?
No, it wasn't a single attempt. They're doing it as we sit here. And they expect to do it during the next campaign.
George Mueller, I appreciate your time and indulging us here in multiple committees, and I yield back to the ranking member if he has. I yield back to the Mr. Hack.
Director Mueller, I'd like to go to the motives behind the Trump campaign, encouragement and acceptance of help during the election. Obviously, a clear motivation was to help them in what would turn out to be a very close election, but there was another key motivation, and that was frankly the desire to make money. I always try to remember what my dad, who never had the opportunity to go beyond the 8th grade, taught me, which is that I should never, ever underestimate the capacity of some people to cut corners and even more in order to worship and chase the almighty buck. And this is important because I think it, in fact, does go to the heart of why the Trump campaign was so unrelentingly intent on developing relationships with the Kremlin. So let's quickly revisit one financial scheme we just discussed, which was the Trump Tower in Moscow. We indicated earlier that it was a lucrative deal. Trump, in fact, stood, he and his company, to earn many millions of dollars on that deal. Did they not, sir? True. And Cohen, Mr. Cohen, his attorney, testified before this committee that President Trump believed the deal required Kremlin approval. Is that consistent with what he told you?
I'm not certain whether it's Mr. Trump himself or others associated with that enterprise had discussed the necessity of having the input from the state, meaning the Russian government, in order for it to go forward successfully.
Isn't it also true that Donald Trump viewed his presidential campaign, as he told top campaign aides, that the campaign was an infomercial for the Trump organization and his properties?
I'm not familiar with that.
Then let's turn to Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort. Did, in fact, your investigation find any evidence that Manafort intended to use his position as Trump's campaign chair for his own personal financial benefit?
I would say there was some indication of that, but I won't go further.
I think you'll find it on page 135 of volume 1. During the transition, Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, met with Sergei Gorkov, the head of a Russian-owned bank that was under U.S. sanctions. And according to the head of the bank, he met with Kushner in his capacity as CEO of Kushner Companies to discuss business opportunities. Is that correct, sir?
I'm not certain.
It was
I'm not certain about that. Let me just put it that way.
It was asserted thusly in your report, volume 1, 160, pages 161 and 162. Your report notes that at the time, Kushner Companies were trying to renegotiate a billion, with a B, $1 billion lease of their flagship building at 666 Fifth Avenue, correct?
I'm not familiar with those financial arrangements.
Also on page 162, where Kushner Companies, it was asserted, had debt obligations coming due on the company. Eric Prince, a supporter close to Trump,
A supporter.
An administrative.
A supporter. I was.
Yes. He met in the Seychelles during the transition with Kirill Dmitriev, who was the head of a sanctioned Russian government investment arm, which had close ties to Vladimir Putin. Correct, sir?
Yes.
Your investigation determined that Mr. Prince had not known nor conducted business with Dmitriev before Trump won the election.
What?
Correct?
I defer to the report on that.
Yet it does. And yet Prince, who had connections to top Trump administration officials, met with Dmitriev during the transition period to discuss business opportunities, among other things. But it wasn't just Trump and his associates who were trying to make money off this deal, nor hide it, nor lie about it. Russia was too. That was the whole point, to gain relief from sanctions, which would hugely benefit their incredibly wealthy oligarchs. For example, sanctions relief was discussed at that June 9th meeting in the Trump Tower, was it not, sir?
Yes. But it was not a main subject for discussion.
Trump administration National Security Advisor designate Michael Flynn also discussed sanctions in a secret conversation with the Russian ambassador, did he not?
Correct.
So to summarize, Donald Trump, Michael Cohen, Paul Manafort, Jared Kushner, Eric Prince, and others in the Trump orbit all tried to use their connections with the Trump organization to profit from Russia, which was openly seeking relief from sanctions. Is that true, sir?
I'm not sure I can adopt what you want.
I will, and I'd further assert that was not only dangerous, it was un-American. Greed corrupts. Greed corrupts, and it is a terrible foundation for developing American foreign policy.
Mr. Ratcliffe. Director Mueller, given your constraints on what you're able or allowed to answer with respect to counterintelligence matters or other matters that are currently open and under investigation, you're not going to be able to answer my remaining questions. So I thank you for your courtesies in the answers that you have given to my prior questions. And I do thank you for your extraordinary career and record of service, and yield the balance of my time to the ranking member. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ratcliffe and Mr. Mueller. Let me associate my words with Mr. Ratcliffe. Got a few more questions. I want to clean up a little bit about the Eric Prince Seychelles meeting. So Eric Prince testified before this committee that he was surveilled by the U.S. government, and that information from the surveillance was leaked to the press. Did you investigate whether Prince was surveilled and whether classified information on him was illegally leaked to the media?
Did you say did you or will you?
Well, I know you can't. I know you're not going to. I know you're not going to join back up in the ranks, but did you were you aware that Prince has made these allegations that he was surveilled? He's concerned that there were leaks about this surveillance. Did you make any referrals about these leaks?
I can't get into discussion on it.
Okay. Also General Flynn, I know you came after the leak of his phone call with the Russian ambassador. Your time at FBI, it would be a major scandal, wouldn't it, for the leak of the National Security Advisor and anyone.
I can't adopt that hypothesis.
Did your report name any people who were acting as U.S. government informants or sources without disclosing that fact?
I can't answer that.
On volume 1, page 133 of your report, you state that Konstantin Kilimnik has ties to Russian intelligence. His name came up quite often today, but your report omits to mention that Kilimnik has long-term relationships with U.S. government officials, including our own State Department.
I can't get into that.
I know it's not in the report, but if Kilimnik is being used in the report to say that he was possibly some type of Russian agent, and I think it is important for this committee to know if Kilimnik has ties to our own State Department, which it appears that he does.
Again, it's the same territory that I'm loath to get into.
I'll get you a chicken salad. Shane and I are gonna,
You
she
asked
just
this
pulled up.
earlier.
Did you have that session tonight?
Trump attorney
So
John
I'm gonna be
Dowd
going
and
on that.
pieces
That phone,
of
when you
his
don't answer,
phone
because there's a lot of sales calls coming in.
were omitted
With
from
me?
the report.
Yours done? You're gonna be done by the time you get back, or what?
Exculpatory
Yeah.
evidence.
I'll be.
Shortly thereafter. All right, I'll be
You're
right
concerned
back.
about
I'm not certain I would agree with that characterization. I think I said that before.
Yes. An American citizen from the Republic of Georgia, who your report misidentifies as a Russian, claims that your report omitted parts of a text message he had with Michael Cohen about stopping the flow of compromising tapes of Donald Trump. In the omitted portions, he says he did not know what the tapes actually showed. Was that portion of the exchange left out of the report for a reason?
No, we got an awful lot into the report, but we did not get every intersection or conversation and the like. So I'm not familiar with that particular episode you're talking about.
Well, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mueller. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Welch.
Director Mueller, did you find there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia?
Well,
Look at this.
collusion.
Dripping all this bitch.
The word Manafort usually uses, not collusion, but one of the, other, terms that fills in when collusion is not used. In any event, we decided not to use the word collusion inasmuch as it has no relevance to the criminal law arena.
The term is conspiracy that you prefer to use.
That's a conspiracy, exactly right.
You help me, I'll help you.
Thank you.
It's an agreement. Thank you. And in fact, you had to then make a charging decision after your investigation, where unless there was enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, you wouldn't make a charge, correct?
That's the case.
But making that decision does not mean your investigation failed to turn up evidence of conspiracy.
Absolutely correct.
And in fact, I'll go through some of the significant findings that your exhaustive investigation made. You found, as I understand it, that from May 2016 until the end of the campaign chairman, Mr. Manafort, gave private polling information to Russian agents, correct?
Correct.
You speak in the microphone.
Yeah, I will.
Thank you. And your investigation found that in June 2016, Donald Trump Jr. made an arrangement to meet at Trump Tower along with Jared Kushner and others, expecting to receive dirt on the Hillary Clinton campaign, correct?
Correct.
And you found in your investigation that on July 27th, candidate Trump called on Russia to hack Hillary Clinton's email, something that for the first time they did about 5 hours later, correct?
That's correct.
Oh, you
You also found that on August 2nd, Mr. Manafort met with a person tied to Russian intelligence, Mr. Klimnik, and gave him internal campaign strategy, aware that Russia was intending to do a misinformation social media campaign, correct?
I'm not certain of the tie there.
But the fact of that meeting, you agree
The fact
with?
of the meeting that took place is accurate.
In your investigation, as I understand it, also found that in late summer of 2016, the Trump campaign, in fact, devised its strategy and messaging around WikiLeaks releases of materials that were stolen from the Democratic National Committee, correct?
Is that from the report?
Yes, it's according to Mr. Gates.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And you also talked earlier about the finding in your investigation that in September and October of 2016, Donald Trump Jr. had email communications with WikiLeaks, now indicted, about releasing information damaging to the Clinton campaign, correct?
True.
So I understand that you made a decision, prosecutorial decision, that this would not rise to proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But I ask if you share my concern. And my concern is, have we established a new normal from this past campaign that is going to apply to future campaigns, so that if any one of us running for the U.S. House, any candidate for the U.S. Senate, any candidate for the presidency of the United States, aware that if a hostile foreign power is trying to influence an election, has no duty to report that to the FBI or other authorities?
I hope.
Go ahead.
I hope this is not the new normal, but I fear it is.
And would, in fact, have the ability, without fear of legal repercussion, to meet with agents of that foreign entity hostile to the American election?
I'm sorry, what is the question?
Is that an apprehension that you share with me?
Yes.
And that there would be no repercussions whatsoever to Russia if they did this again. And as you stated earlier, as we sit here, they're doing it now. Is that correct?
You're absolutely right.
Do you have any advice to this Congress as together what we should do to protect our electoral system and accept responsibility on our part to report to you or your successor when we're aware of hostile foreign engagement in our elections?
I would say the basis, the first line of defense really is the ability of the various agencies that have some piece of this to not only share information, but share expertise, share targets, and use the full resources that we have to address this problem.
Thank you, Director Mueller. I yield back.
Mr. Maloney. Mr. Mueller, thank you. I know it's been a long day, and I want to make clear how much respect I have for your service and for your extraordinary career. I want you to understand my questions in that context, sir. I'm going to be asking you about Appendix C to your report, and in particular, the decision not to do a sworn interview with the president. It's really the only subject I want to talk to you about, sir. Why didn't you subpoena the president?
Well, at the outset, after we took over and initiated the investigation.
If I could ask you to speak on the
microphone. Of course. At the outset, after we took over the investigation and began it and pursued it, quite honestly, one of the things we anticipated wanting to accomplish that is having the interview of the president. We negotiated with him for a little over a year, and I think what you adverted to in the appendix lays out our expectations as a result of those negotiations. But finally, when it became, we were almost towards the end of our investigation, and we had little success in pushing to get the interview of the president. We decided that we did not want to exercise the subpoena powers because of the necessity of expediting the end of the investigation.
Was that, excuse me, did you want
the expectation was, if we did subpoena the president, he would fight the subpoena, and we would be in the midst of the investigation for a substantial period of time.
Right, but as we sit here, you've never had an opportunity to ask the president in-person questions under oath, and so obviously that must have been a difficult decision. And you're right, Appendix C lays that out, and indeed, I believe you described the in-person interview as vital. That's your word. And of course, you made clear you had the authority and the legal justification to do it. As you point out, you waited a year. You put up with a lot of negotiations. You made numerous accommodations, which you lay out so that he could prepare and not be surprised. I take it you were trying to be fair to the president. And by the way, you were going to limit the questions when you got to written questions to Russia only. And in fact, you did go with written questions after about 9 months, sir, right? And the president responded to those, and you have some hard language for what you thought of those responses. What did you think of the president's written responses, Mr. Mueller?
It's certainly not as useful as the interview would be.
In fact, you pointed out, and by my count, there were more than 30 times when the president said he didn't recall, he didn't remember, no independent recollection, no current recollection. And I take it by your answer that it wasn't as helpful. That's why you used words like incomplete, imprecise, inadequate, insufficient. Is that a fair summary of what you thought of those written answers?
That is a fair summary. And I presume that comes from your report.
And yes, sir, and I ask this respectfully. By the way, the president didn't ever claim the Fifth Amendment, did he?
I'm not going to talk to that.
Well, from what I can tell, sir, at one point it was vital, and then at another point it wasn't vital. And my question to you is, why did it stop being vital? And I can only think of 3 explanations. One is that somebody told you you couldn't do it, but nobody told you you couldn't subpoena the president. Is that right?
No, we understood we could subpoena the president.
Rosenstein didn't tell you, Whitaker didn't tell you, Barr didn't tell you you couldn't.
We could serve a subpoena.
So the only other explanation, well, there's 2 others, I guess. One, that you just flinched. That you had the opportunity to do it and you didn't do it. But sir, you don't strike me as the kind of guy who flinches.
I hope not.
Well, then the third explanation, I hope not too, sir. And the third explanation I can think of is that you didn't think you needed it. And in fact, what caught my eye was page 13 on volume 2, where you said, in fact, you had a substantial body of evidence. And you cite a bunch of cases there, don't you, about how you often have to prove intent to obstruct justice without an in-person interview. That's the kind of nature of it. And you use terms like a substantial body of evidence, significant evidence of the president's intent. So my question, sir, is, did you have sufficient evidence of the president's intent to obstruct justice? And is that why you didn't do the interview?
There's a balance. In other words, how much evidence you have to satisfy the last element against how much time are you willing to spend in the courts litigating the interview.
In this case, you felt that you had enough evidence of the president's intent.
We had to make a balanced decision in terms of how much evidence we had compared to the length of time it would take.
And sir, because I have limited time, you thought that if you gave it to the Attorney General or to this Congress, that there was sufficient evidence that it was better than that delay.
Can you state that again?
Well, that it was better than the delay to present the sufficient evidence, your term, of the president's intent to obstruct justice to the Attorney General and to this committee. Isn't that why you didn't do the interview?
No, the reason we didn't do the interview is because of the length of time that it would take to resolve the issues attendant to that.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Demings.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and Director Mueller, thank you so much for being a person of honor and integrity. Thank you for your service to the nation. We are certainly better for